When I was a little girl, I used to love fairy tales. Snow White, Beauty and the Beast, Cinderella, it was my favorite. I was always encouraged how they would take something so broken and it would end up so beautiful. Well, as I've gotten older, I've come to realize life is not a fairy tale at all. It's very real. But God can take our brokenness and He can make something so very beautiful. So join me as we explore chapter by chapter stories of faith, determination, and courage of people that you may very well know. You may not think you do, but we all have a story to tell.
My name is Chris Penn, and this is my story. I spent every summer for the first, I think it was somewhere around 10 years of my life, in Florida with my grandparents, even when I was a baby at just a year old. So they were a big part of my life. It was just me, my mom, and my dad. And it was like that for a little while. And then I was somewhere between I'm thinking somewhere around 6 to 8 years old when my parents split up. And then it became just me and my mom. I had a lot of thoughts that were in my mind that I didn't have answers to. And in my mind, it was important for me to find those answers and to figure out those answers. I wanted to know why my dad wasn't there every day. I wanted to know, why I was the one that was going home from school and not being able to say, "Hi, Mom, hi, Dad," when everyone else was. Or why I couldn't see certain friends unless it was time for a weekend for me to go visit with my other parents, with my dad. And so I had a lot of those questions going on inside of my mind, and I eventually started looking for who to blame. I never really accepted the fact that we're all human and we all make mistakes until I was later on and gave my life to God and realized that some things just happen. But until that point, it drove me crazy looking for answers. And then, I always wanted to know who was supposed to be that father figure in my life. If my dad wasn't there and it was just me and my mom, who was supposed to be that person that was there to teach me and that was there to raise me up? And I didn't really get that until she ran into and started dating my stepdad, now Tony Tabor. When he came along, at first things were great. They were great between me and him. They were good between him and Mom, and I believe, if I remember right, I even asked her if she was going to marry him, and because I wanted that father figure in my life. And then as I got older in that situation, then the anger that was on the inside of me began to surface. I couldn't really hide it no more. And it was a rule in the house that if the church doors were open, we were there. It was me and my mom and my stepdad. We were at Emmanuel Baptist Church was where we were going at the time. That's where I spent most of my childhood, there and back and forth between there and Seven Springs Baptist Church, which is where my dad went, and my stepmom, Linda. That's where they went. So I was back and forth between those two churches. But most of my time was at Emmanuel. I was involved in RAs, which is Royal Ambassadors, and I was involved in all kinds of things for kids. They did everything they could to try to keep me occupied and to try to keep me moving in the right direction. I got a lot of God put in me through that, through Sunday school, through my Sunday school teachers, my pastors, and my parents being active. They were always active. No matter what church they go to, they're active. They're serving and doing things, which I think is where a lot I get what I do from. Because it was so important to them that you do things like you're serving. You're not just there taking up space. You're serving. You're doing something. Because it was for God. But even as a kid, I had problems accepting that because I could not see God here with me now. I related everything I heard about God to past tense, like he died on the cross for me, but then I related everything after that to when I get to heaven, I'll see him and talk to him then. So like the whole relationship thing was nothing to me. I didn't even see it was possible because I saw him as being in heaven and me being here, and I'm just going to have to live my life here while I wait to get there. As a teenager, my early teens, my anger began to get out of control. My mom and Tony might tell you it was younger than that, but what I can really remember the most was early teens. I began to just turn on everybody. I began to turn on my mom. I began to turn on Tony. I began to turn on, at this time, my little brother was here, Ryan, which he he was born into a situation to where I was already gone. Like, in my mind, I was already gone. So he got the worst of me in his younger years. So I was really abusive towards him. I began to be abusive towards Mom. I began to be abusive towards Tony. There were times where it got physically violent, not just verbally. I really lost it at home. And like my anger got to a point to where it scared me. I did not know what I could do with it. I was afraid. I was afraid of what I could end up doing. It scared me to that point. When I was 15, I was with a friend, and I was over at his house, and his mom pulled out her cigarettes, and in her cigarettes, she had some marijuana rolled up, and she gave it to us and let us smoke it. And at that point in time, I got high, and when that was over, when that high went away, I was on my way home, and that's when I realized, hey, during that point in time, you had no pain. You weren't hurting. Your anger was gone. You weren't having to deal with it. You weren't having to try to control it and fight it. It was gone. So at that point in time, not realizing that I could have that relationship with God now instead of later, that became my answer. That was how I could control all this anger, because most of the people I hung around with in school and all that probably could not tell you very much about my anger because I kept it suppressed. I kept it hidden underneath staying high so much all the time. My anger really didn't flow until I got home. And if I started coming down off of my high, then that's when my anger started coming up out of me. So I started just staying high as much as I could. And if I felt that I was coming down and my anger was getting out of control, I went somewhere and I lit up. And eventually, I went from smoking weed to popping pills with it. And I never really got into uppers or anything that made me speed or made me go like that, because that would feed my anger. It was always downers. I had to have something to keep me down, and in order to keep my anger suppressed. So because I believe to this day I would probably have done some really stupid stuff if I didn't keep my anger suppressed. I don't know what I would have done, but I know it was out of control. I wouldn't have been able to control it at one point. Mom and Tony at that time, they were just trying to help this kid that they saw needed help, and I turned on them. I turned on everybody, because if I started letting what I was feeling out of me, all it took was for my mom to give me some kind of little hint that she somewhat agreed with what I was saying that I felt about my dad for not being there, that it caused me to react in defense of him. I immediately went from saying what I felt about him to telling her, that's my dad, don't even go there. And so it was a no-win situation. I was just completely shut off from everybody, trying to figure it out on my own. And so therefore I had no help. It was just me and my weed and my pills. So around the age of 20 to 21, I ended up moving away. And then I ended up, I had an accident with a car I was driving. And I called my grandparents, because now they're not in Florida. At this point in time, they had moved up from Florida to be closer to everybody, and they're living in Nashville, Tennessee. So when I had this accident, I was about 30, 40 minutes away from their home. And I called them, told them that I had just been in an accident. They got in their vehicle, them and my Uncle Mark, and they come up and they looked at the vehicle, looked at the situation, looked at the black marks all over the road, and they just started thanking God that I was still alive. And then here I am, still with that old concept that God's not here right now. I don't know why you're thanking Him. I'm just alive. Like, it's that way in my mind. They tell me, they say, okay, we're going to your house, we're getting your bags, we're getting your clothes, we're getting all your stuff, and you're coming back to Nashville with us. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, tried everything else. So I said, okay. I said, let's do that. So we got my stuff. They called a wrecker to come pick up my car. My Uncle Mark, he worked as a mechanic. They had my car sent to where he worked. They had it all towed. We went back. I got my stuff settled into my grandparents' house, and I was sitting there, and it just kind of dawned on me. My whole life I've been seeking that fatherly figure. I had spent several summers with my grandparents in Florida, and then now through all this, now I'm living there with them. So I'm thinking to myself, this is it. So I'm there and I'm thinking, I found them. Here we are. And I get a job. It wasn't a good job. It was selling Kirby vacuums, going door to door. But it was a job for now, at the moment. It wasn't, I don't even think my grandparents were happy about it, but I was working. I continued to do all the drugs and stuff, and it began to escalate. I began to do more and more. I began staying out more, staying out late, staying out almost all night long, coming in, and one day I come home one morning, early morning. It was probably between 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning, and my grandparents are sitting out on the front porch. And I had always been told by my aunts and uncles that if that happens, you're in trouble. So I pull up in the driveway, and there they are. I start walking up, and they said, where have you been? I said, I sold some vacuums today, and we've been out celebrating. And they said, well, where were you? I said, well, we were at the club. I said, I've been drinking, doing all kinds of stuff. And my grandma just turned around and walked back inside the house. She didn't have anything else to say. And my papa was smoking on a cigarette, and he cleared his throat. And I thought, well, I guess I'm really about to find out what my aunts and uncles were always telling me about. And he looked at me and he said, I'm thankful that you're alive, but you're going to have to decide what you want to do with yourself in your life, because this path you're on is not going to be here forever. You're on a path to death. And that's what he told me. So it just kind of took me back. Here I am expecting discipline, expecting them to get on to me, yell at me, do something. That isn't what I got. He just gave me just this little calm, you're on the path to death talk. But I was just struggling. They both knew my hurts. They both knew my pains. I was able to be honest with them. I was able to speak up and speak out. And I realized, when I did open up, they weren't going to lash back at me. They were going to let me open up and then give me direction on how to handle that. So I began to speak out. I began to talk a little bit about some things that bothered me and about how come I'm doing the things I'm doing now and what it is I'm trying to overcome my setbacks. And I'm sitting here thinking, I'm finally in that place where I get what I've been looking for my whole life. One day I began to notice that his health was declining. Things weren't as good for him. He wasn't getting around as good as he could, as what I knew he could, and I just saw that it was just going downhill. And what I thought was a little quicker than normal. And then it wasn't too much longer after that, after I started realizing this, I'm like, I've just found them. I've just got here. I've just got to this place. I've just got this father figure back in my life. And now it looks like I'm losing him. So at this point in time, he ends up, hospice is coming over. They're staying there. They're not staying there, but he's staying there. He's bedridden. He gets to be to where he can't get out of the bed. They're teaching me how to turn the oxygen levels up on the machines and how to take care of him. So I quit my job. I'm no longer working for Kirby selling those vacuums. I'm at home with him. Mama's working, and I'm at home with him. And I'm taking care of him. And then one day the nurse come in and she says, is there anybody that he hasn't seen? And I just looked at her and I said, yeah, I know who it is. And I immediately got on the phone, and I called my mom, and I said, you and Uncle Mike need to get down here. I said, because if you don't, you may not ever see him again. I knew what he was waiting on. He was waiting on them, but I was watching him suffer. It was one of those knowings on the inside. The longer he waits on them, the more he's going to suffer and the more pain he's going to be in, because I've got the oxygen level turned all the way up on the machine. I can't turn it up no more. And I couldn't take it. So I went and I made the phone call. That night, within just a few hours, Mom and then my uncle and my brother and everybody's there. They're all over at the house. I think my aunt, everybody just decided to come over. There were sleeping bags everywhere, air mattresses everywhere. And then we're all talking at night and gathering up. Everybody's going back there and seeing Papa as they can, spending individual time with him, group time with him. And I'm staying away. I'm not even going back there. And so I just ended up laying down that night, going to sleep, and honestly, I can say I had peace on the inside because I knew he wasn't going to be suffering no more. I knew it was coming. I knew, and I don't even know how to explain it. I just knew. So that morning, Mama comes yelling through the house, he's gone. She's waking everybody up saying he's gone. So I hear her telling everybody that, and my thought is, now my father is gone. My father figure that I've needed in my life is gone. So we go through all that, the funeral process, and there's a couple of weeks after I stay there with Mama, but it isn't too much longer after that. I ended up moving out and getting my own place. Things were just getting worse and worse and worse for me. I was in situations I should have never been in. I was in situations that could have got me killed at any given point in time. But one day my grandma calls me and she asked me, she goes, how are you paying your rent? My grandma was the one person that I didn't want to hurt. She was the one person that I knew had always fought for me, that was still alive. between her and So I couldn't lie to her. I couldn't tell her, you know, that I'm working somewhere and I've got this job and I'm making money and I'm able to pay my bills. So instead of just telling her a lie, I just didn't tell her anything. I just sat there quiet on the phone and I never answered her. I didn't give her an answer. And that's when on the phone she says, and I don't even know why she said it this way, but she says, you need to call your dad and you need to go back to your dad's house in Kentucky. And so I was like, why my dad? You know, I'm sitting there thinking, why my dad? Why not my mom? Why not, you know, someone else? Why not anywhere else? But why my dad? So I did. I got off the phone with her. I called my dad, told him I wanted to come to his place and I wanted to come back home. And he told me, he said, you can come, but all the drugs and all the mess stays where you are. You don't bring it here. I go back home and I go back to his place and I gather up with one of my friends. First thing, I call him, say, hey, I'm back. I'm over at my dad's. He comes and picks me up. We go out. We smoke. I go back home to dad's. I'm sitting out on the front porch on the swing, just looking up in the sky. And all of a sudden I hear this voice. And it tells me, it says, you can clean up and live your life for me, or you're going to be in the jail. And I just sat there for a second and I'm like, I know this is God without having to know, like without having to get this pastor or somebody to tell me God just spoke to me. I just have this knowing, like for the first time in my life, I'm recognizing God speaking to me now. And so that's the first thing I do that next Sunday morning. I go to Emmanuel Baptist Church where Mom is. She's doing what she always does. She plays the piano at Emmanuel. She plays keyboards here. And the pastor went up behind the pulpit, had this big message planned, and then just looks out over the crowd and says, for some reason, all I'm doing today is this. And he looks out at the crowd and he says, Lazarus, come forth. And I knew enough about the Bible to know that God was talking to me, and he was telling me he was bringing me back from the dead today. Because I already had it in my mind I was going to be a statistic on a billboard. This child lived for this amount of time and went through the things he went through because he grew up in a split home. It was a billboard. Split home children. Statistics. With my face on it. So I knew when he said, Lazarus, come forth, God was talking to me. And Mom just hit one note. She didn't even finish playing a whole note. She just hit a key. And that's it. I jumped out of the pew right there. And I went down. I bypassed the pastor. I didn't even talk to him. I don't even know if I knew his name at the time. I just went down and got on my knees at that altar and gave my life to God, and the drugs and the alcohol was gone right there on the spot. I felt it leave me. So here I am now. I'm trying to live my life the best I can to pursue God and what he has for me. I'm learning more and more about him. I've been around mentors. I'm always around a mentor. I have people speaking into my life at all the time. And then I pull up in Conrad's parking lot one day, and Heather comes up to me and says, I know you're clean. I know you've gotten your life together and you're moving forward. can you help me? So I said, yeah, I'll help you. We're friends. We've been friends for years. I was 17, she was 13 when we started being friends. Now at this point in time, I'm 24. So I'm like, yes, of course, I'll help you. So I go and we talk. We drive around. And at this point in my life, I was able to be around her and not think about anything other than helping her, because I had been told by one of my mentors, don't try to date anybody right now, and just wait until God shows you who that person is. So in my mind, Heather wasn't a date. Heather was somebody I could help. And that's the way I looked at it. So then I went and picked her up. We went and we talked and did the best I could at that time with what little I knew on trying to help her get on that path where she could get the help that she needed. So now we were in a place where we weren't able to see each other. So we're riding back and forth. And one night I was praying for her, and I was praying for her a lot. Almost every night I would pray for her. So I prayed for her, and when I was praying for her this particular moment, I believe I had heard the Holy Spirit tell me that this was the one I was supposed to be with. This was my wife. And so I immediately got up and wrote a letter, and I was asking her, I was like, has God been talking to you about your spouse or your boyfriend or anything like that? I can't remember my exact wording of it, but I asked her point blank, has God been talking to you about who you're supposed to be with? And she wrote back, very simple, yes, which that drove me crazy, because I'm sitting here thinking, you're not telling me what I need you to tell me. So I wrote back, I said, who? Who is this that God has been telling you? And underneath that, I believe, if I remember right, I ended up telling her that God showed me that it was her. And she wrote back and said, confirm, yes, God had been talking to me about you, and that, he had been showing me you. And I was like, okay. So not being able to see her, I don't know why, I drew a rose on a piece of paper and mailed it to her, and that was the first flower she got from me. So just in my own little way, I got her a flower, and because I couldn't see her, so it was kind of like that whole, okay, so here we are, and we see this now, and this is how our life is going to go. We're eventually going to be together. And a little bit later on, she's back home, and we start actually dating. In my mind, hey, it's supposed to happen, so it's going to happen. There's nothing going to be able to stop it. Like, it's God's will. What God wants, that's what happens. So that was my mentality. And so instead of seeking God over us like I should have been doing, getting vision and seeing what I needed to do to be a better husband, what I needed to do to be prepared for the life that God had for us, I just completely threw that all out in the background. Like, it was supposed to happen, so hey, I didn't even worry about it. I didn't pray about it, didn't do nothing. A little bit later on down the road, we split up. And that was hard for me, because I'm sitting there thinking, it's God's will. It's supposed to happen. Like, it's God's will. God's will means it happens. It doesn't mean it breaks up, falls apart, goes anywhere. Like, it's God's will. Like, it's supposed to happen. So, valuable lesson learned for me, we have an enemy. And just because something is God's will doesn't mean it's going to go that way if you don't fight for it. So, as we're split up, and I'm seeking God over everything, and I'm basically coming to a place in my life where I'm just going to accept the fact that we might not ever get back together again, and I'm going to move on in my life. Then I see she starts coming into church because I never quit coming here. She never quit coming here, and there was only one service. So we had to see each other all the time. But my focus remained what I'm supposed to do, for God in this house and serving in this house, because this is where God had called me to be. I watch her. She comes in. I'm watching her. She has Gavin. And then finally one day I'm driving down the road, and I get up there to the stoplight in town, and I just started cussing God over it all. I mean, I lost it. I had all this stuff built up in me about it all, confusion, anger, and I lost it. Of course, I don't have any drugs or alcohol or anything like that to suppress it. So you got to let it out somehow. Well, I lost it. I let it out. And God just said, whoa. He didn't, it wasn't a whoa. It was just, whoa. Whoa. Real calm. Real collective. He says, whoa. And when he does, the hair on my neck stands up. I've never cussed God again. Because he gave me an answer that day. He said, just call her and tell her that you forgive her. So I'm like, what? And he says again, just call her, tell her you forgive her. So I did. After he did that, said that to me, I call her and I say, hey, I'm just calling you. I just want to tell you I forgive you. I let everything go. I'm not holding nothing against you. It's over. Like, I forgive you. And from that point on, we began talking again and seeing each other again and being around each other. From there, I began praying. Like, this time, I'm not losing it. I'm praying. I'm getting vision. I'm getting what it is I need to know. I'm studying what I'm supposed to be a husband. Anything the Bible says about a man and a husband and a wife, I'm studying it and looking at it, trying to figure out where I fit into that. And so we began dating again, and a little while into it, Pastor Chris and Sue decide they're going to do a marriage conference. And everyone had been saying, when are you going to marry her? When are you going to propose to her? And I'm like, I ain't getting rushed into this. I'm doing this God's timing, God's way. And so just because, everybody else is saying you should do this, doesn't mean it's God's time. And doesn't mean it's what you and her want whenever you talk to each other. So not only that, but I didn't want all of them to know. I wanted it to be a surprise, and I knew if they knew, she'd know. So I kept everything quiet to myself. And so I decided that this marriage conference, this first marriage conference that Life in Christ Church was going to do, was going to be the time that I proposed to her. I thought, well, it fits. We were both single. At the time, the singles were serving the married couples. And I kind of thought to myself after it was over, I just killed two birds in one stone. I don't have to serve at this no more. And I can propose to her, we can be married, and then next year we can come to this and sit down. And I can enjoy it and not serve at it. And that's really kind of messed up, but it's what I was thinking. And so I went in, I got one of her grandma's old rings, and at the end of it, I had told Pastor and Chris and Pastor Sue that I wanted to do this. At the end, we kind of set it up. And then Pastor calls me and Heather up, and they start talking about how we were serving, the singles were serving. They started talking about how good the singles did serving them, and they recognized all the singles for serving. And then Pastor handed me the microphone, and I turned around to Heather right there in front of everybody and proposed to her. And she said yes. And then from there we started planning a wedding and planning our life together. And, here we are this next October the 1st to be 10 years that we've been married. Being here at Life in Christ has changed everything for me. When I came here, I started learning about the relationship side of God now, not just later. I started learning how I could hear Him now. I started learning how He talks to us, He leads us, He guides us, He gives us direction now. So that's what Life in Christ did for me. It helped me to recognize those things, and then that relationship with God is real, and He really does want it here with you right now, and that it is about right now, not later. And then the fact of faith, learning how to walk in faith, receive what God did for you when He sent Jesus to the cross in faith, knowing it because you're His child, that was done for you, and you just have to receive it and believe it and walk in it. And that freedom is yours for you to grab a hold of if you believe and you want it and you go after it. And Pastor Chris he teaches so much about faith and about being a man and being a man of God and being the spiritual leader of your home. I've heard him, I don't know how many times, say that the husband is the pastor of his home, and that he's that leader, that shepherd over his house, and how serious it is to take on that responsibility. And you have to be prayed up. You have to know what God wants for your family. You have to be able to recognize when the enemy's coming after your family and how to protect it and how to fight that fight, because fighting that good fight of faith was never in my mind until I came here. My mindset and my mentality was, if God wanted it to happen, it was going to happen. It was His will, so it was going to happen. And I didn't understand the fight. I didn't understand the enemy, Jesus, the spiritual warfare. I didn't understand all that. But coming here and being underneath Pastor Chris and learning how to be that spiritual man of God, that's how I've got to where I am now. That's how I'm able to lead my family. I'm able to help my family. I'm able to raise up young men, because we have 3 boys. I'm able to raise up young men of God, and they're all different, but that's the relationship side of things. We all have differences, and we all learn and differently, and the main thing is just I know I would not be where I am now if it wasn't for being underneath Pastor Chris's teachings, Pastor Sue's teachings, and listening to them both teach us about our walk with God being about right here and right now. My name is Chris Penn, and that is my story.